13,000 feet over Germany, her parachute failed. The stranger who caught her had 9 seconds. She knew his voice. She knew his laugh. She did not know what they called him in Seoul. This is entry 1.
13,000 feet above a grass airfield outside Bonn, Tanya Brooks pulled her ripcord and the sky did nothing. She waited the half-second she had been taught to wait. Half a second is a long time when you are falling, long enough to notice that the wind had changed pitch, long enough to look up over her own shoulder and see, instead of 200 square feet of nylon opening above her like a held breath, a knot of pale fabric twisting itself tighter with every meter she dropped. She reached for the reserve. Her hand knew the drill better than her mind did, and her hand found the handle, and her hand pulled, and the second canopy came out of its pack and went straight into the first one, and the two of them wrapped around each other like arguing lovers. Below her, Germany was getting bigger, not slowly. There is a moment in a fall when the ground stops being scenery and starts being an appointment, and Tanya Brooks passed through that moment at 4,000 meters with her heart going like a fist against a locked door. She had jumped 211 times. She knew what the ground looked like from every height there was. This was the first time it had ever looked like it was coming for her personally. Entry 1, the 12th of June, Bonn, Germany. To understand how a woman from the west side of Atlanta fell out of a German sky with 2 dead parachutes above her head, you have to go back a long way before that plane. Tanya Brooks was 29 years old, tall, full-figured, and strong through the shoulders in the way that swimmers are, with warm, deep brown skin and box braids she wore pulled back and knotted high whenever she was about to do something her mother would not have approved of. She laughed loudly. She took up room. Strangers remembered her, and she had stopped apologizing for that somewhere around her 25th birthday. Her mother had died at 43, not dramatically, not in a way anybody made a story out of. She had gone to work, come home, made dinner, sat down on the couch to rest her legs for a moment before the washing up, and simply not stood up again. She had never left Georgia. She had never been in an aeroplane. She had a shoebox in her wardrobe full of brochures for places she was going to see once things settled down, and things had never once settled down, and Tanya had found that shoebox 8 days after the funeral, and sat on the floor of her mother's bedroom, holding a folded picture of the Amalfi Coast until the light went out of the window. That was the day the fear started. Not fear of dying, fear of the other thing. Fear of the slow, small life that closes over a person so gently they never feel the lid come down. So she jumped. First, out of a plane in Tennessee, strapped to an instructor who smelled of cigarettes, screaming the whole way down and laughing at the bottom until she was sick. Then off a bridge in Idaho with a cord around her ankles. Then off a cliff in Interlaken with a wingsuit and a man shouting corrections at her in Swiss German. She worked as a physiotherapist for a sports clinic in Buckhead. She was very good at it, and she spent every dollar that was not rent on the next thing that would make her heart run. Her best friend Nia called it a death wish. Tanya told her it was the opposite. A death wish is a woman on a couch with a shoebox full of brochures. This was a life wish, and it was expensive, and she was going to keep paying for it. 6,000 miles away, in a city that was awake at 3 in the morning, a man was inheriting the exact opposite problem. Han Do-yeon was 33, lean, hard through the shoulders, an angular jaw he had from his father, and quiet hands he had from nobody in particular. He ran 8 kilometers before dawn every single day of his life in every city he was in, because it was the only hour of the day that belonged to him. He had studied engineering in Vancouver. He spoke English with a soft, flat accent that people found calming, which was useful because almost nothing else about his life was calming at all. His grandfather had built the family business out of a fishing port in the 1960s, moving goods that did not want to be seen moving. His father had grown it, cleaned half of it, buried the other half deeper, and died in a hospital bed in Busan, with a cannula in his arm and a lawyer at his side, dictating the terms of what his son would take over. Do-yeon had been at university at the time. He had flown home for the funeral, and he had never gone back for his final semester. 14 years later, he had a shipping arm, a construction arm, 3 hotels, a haulage company in Incheon that was entirely legitimate and made real money, and underneath it all, the old machine, still running, still moving the things that did not want to be seen, still feeding everyone who ate at that table. He had asked once at 24 whether it could simply be stopped, whether the clean half could be kept and the old half let go. His mother had listened to the whole question without interrupting him. Then she had explained, patiently, the way you explain the weather to a child, that 1,100 families were fed by the old half, that the men who had knelt at his father's funeral had knelt to a promise, not to a person, and that a machine like theirs does not stop. It either runs or it is taken apart by the people who have been waiting years for someone to be soft enough to let them try. He never asked again. He built a good long habit of not asking questions he already knew the answer to. But we are going to keep asking you to subscribe, because it is the one question we have never once known the answer to. Hit it if you have not already. 2 people. One running towards the edge of everything because she was terrified of a small life. One standing in the middle of a very large life he had never once chosen. Neither of them looking for the other. Neither of them expecting anything at all for the second week of June. He was in Germany that week for the most ordinary reason a man like him ever travels. A logistics conference in Cologne, 3 days of handshakes and lanyards, and a Sunday free at the end of it. He had learned to skydive in British Columbia when he was 22, in the year before his father got sick, and he had kept it up the way some men keep up a language they no longer have anyone to speak with. It was the only sport he knew where nobody could reach him. No phone, no bodyguards. 90 seconds of falling in which he was simply a body in air and not the last name he had been handed. So, on the 12th of June, Han Do-yeon drove himself out to a grass airfield outside Bonn, signed a form with a name that was not quite his, and got on a plane with 11 other people. One of them was a black American woman with box braids knotted high, checking her own rig twice, talking to nobody. Now, before this goes any further, I want you to sit with something, because the whole story turns on it. If a stranger saved your life, and then months later you found out exactly who that stranger was, and what he did for a living, and what his family had done for 60 years, would you be able to unremember the falling? Put your honest answer in the comments, not the polite one. I read them. The jump run was routine. Do-yeon went out 6th, Tanya went out 9th. There were 9 seconds between them, and in those 9 seconds, nothing whatsoever went wrong. He was flying his own body, tracking away from the group across the top of a cloud layer, the Rhine somewhere off to his left, when he rolled onto his side to check the airspace above him and saw a canopy that was not a canopy, a twist of white, something wrong in the shape of it, and below the wrong shape, a person not slowing down. There is a calculation every experienced jumper knows and almost nobody ever runs. He ran it in less than a second. She was above him and to the north, falling faster than a stable body falls, because a partially inflated canopy does not slow you, it drags you and it spins you. He was under her and ahead of her. The gap was closing at the wrong rate. He had at best 11 or 12 seconds of usable altitude to give away, and he was going to have to give away nearly all of it. He turned and went head down. If you have never seen a skydiver go head down, understand that it is not falling, it is diving deliberately in the direction of the Earth at close to 300 kilometers an hour, and every meter you gain in speed is a meter you will not have to open in. 300 kilometers an hour to reach somebody he had never met. The subscribe button is about 4 inches from your thumb, and it has not moved once this entire video, just saying. He closed the distance in 9 seconds. He hit her at an angle, hard, arm across her chest and legs locking around her thigh, and the two of them went into a violent flat spin that pulled the blood towards his hands and grayed the edges of his vision. Tanya later would only ever be able to describe 3 things about that moment: the sound, the weight of an arm arriving out of nothing, and a man's voice, very close to her ear, in accented English, saying one word: cut. She could not reach her own cutaway handle. He reached it for her. The dead canopies went away above them like a bad idea leaving a room. And then there was only the two of them, tangled, falling together, with under 1,000 meters left. He pulled his own reserve at 400. The opening shock was so hard it tore her left shoulder out of its socket and drove the harness webbing into the meat of his thighs. They came down under a canopy built for one person, carrying 2, far too fast, into a barley field 1.5 kilometers short of the airfield, and he twisted in the last 3 meters so that he went into the ground first and she went into him. Then it was quiet. She was lying half across a stranger in a green field in Germany, with her arm hanging wrong and her mouth full of the taste of pennies, and the sky above her was completely empty and completely blue, and it took her a long moment to understand that the wet sound she could hear was her own breathing. The stranger sat up. He looked at her arm, he looked at her face, and in English, calmly as if they had met in a queue somewhere, he asked her whether she was going to jump again. Tanya Brooks laughed. It hurt enormously. She said yes, he said good, and then he lay back down in the barley and did not move for a very long time. And she realized, watching his chest go up and down, that the man who had just caught her out of the air was shaking harder than she was. The ambulance took 40 minutes to find them. In those 40 minutes, she learned that his name was Do-yoon, that he was from Seoul, that he was in Germany for work, and that he had been jumping for 11 years. He learned that she was from Atlanta, that she was a physiotherapist, that she had 211 jumps, and that she was going to be extremely annoyed about the shoulder. He did not tell her that he had already put his hand over the small camera on his own helmet and switched it off before the ambulance arrived. He did not tell her why a man might not want footage of himself existing. At the hospital in Bonn, she gave him her number, written on the back of a discharge form because it seemed insane not to. He entered it into a phone she noticed was very cheap and very plain. He flew back to Seoul the following evening. She flew back to Atlanta 3 days later with her arm in a sling and a story her friends refused to believe until she showed them the incident report. Speaking of things nobody believes, apparently some of you have been watching this channel for months without ever subscribing. The button is free. It has always been free. Neither of them expected to hear from the other again. That is the part everybody gets wrong about how these things start. Nobody plans them. Nobody is looking. It happens in the gap where you are not paying attention. Entry 2, the 22nd of June, Atlanta, Georgia. He messaged her 10 days later, 3 words, "How is the shoulder?" She stared at the screen for a full minute before she answered, and she typed and deleted 4 different replies before she settled on the truth, which was that the shoulder was terrible and that she had already booked her next jump for August. He wrote back that this was either very brave or very stupid. She wrote back that in her experience, those 2 things sit at the same table. That was the beginning of 5 months of the strangest courtship either of them had ever had. The time difference was 13 hours, which meant that they were almost never awake in the same part of the day, and so they learned each other the slow way, in messages that arrived while the other one was asleep, and were read first thing in the morning like letters. She would wake up to a photograph of a Seoul street at 10 at night, rain on the tarmac, the light of a convenience store falling out across the pavement. He would wake up to a voice note of her swearing at a treadmill. Then the calls started. Hers at 6 in the morning with coffee, his at 7 in the evening with the lights of the city coming on behind him. Twice a week, then 4 times, then every day, then twice a day, then the kind of calls where neither person is saying anything and neither person hangs up. She told him about her mother, about the shoebox, about the folded picture of the Amalfi Coast that lived in her wallet now, and about the fear that had shaped her entire adult life, which was not the fear of dying, but the fear of never having gone anywhere. He told her almost nothing true, and he did it so gracefully that it took her 3 months to notice. He said the family business was shipping and construction. That was true. He said his father had died when he was young, and he had taken over before he was ready. That was true. He said the hours were long and the people were difficult, and that he could not leave the country easily. All of that was true. Everything he said to her was true, and none of it was honest. And there is a particular kind of loneliness in loving somebody accurately while lying to them completely. Because he did love her. He worked out roughly when, and it embarrassed him. It was not the barley field. It was a Tuesday in September when she had called him at 4 in the morning her time, half asleep, having forgotten the time zones entirely, and had talked to him for 40 minutes about absolutely nothing, and he had sat in the back of a car outside a warehouse in Incheon where 4 men were waiting for him to come in and make a decision that would ruin somebody, and he had told the driver to wait, and he had listened to a woman in Georgia describe her neighbor's dog, and he had not wanted the call to end. He went into that warehouse afterwards, and he was kinder than he had ever been in his life, and everybody in the room noticed, and one of them thought about what it might mean. Nia noticed first on Tanya's end. Nia had known Tanya since they were 11, and Nia was not a romantic, and Nia asked the question that was going to sit at the center of everything. She asked what he actually did. Tanya said shipping. Nia asked what he shipped. And Tanya opened her mouth and found that she did not know.
She had spent 5 months talking to a man twice a day, and she could not have told you the name of his company. She could have told you the sound he made when he was trying not to laugh. She could have told you that he ran at dawn because it was the only hour that was his. She could not have told you the name of his company. So she looked. It took her 4 hours, and it was not difficult, which was the part that frightened her most. A Korean business news site, translated badly by her browser, a photograph from a groundbreaking ceremony, and there he was, in a dark suit, third from the left, half turned away from the camera as if he had felt it coming. Then a court case from 2019, then a name repeated in 3 articles alongside a word her browser rendered as organization, and then rendered as syndicate, and then rendered as family. Then a documentary clip, subtitled, in which a retired prosecutor in Seoul described the group that had operated out of a southern fishing port since the 1960s, moving product through legitimate freight, and explained with the flat weariness of a man who had failed that they had never made a single case stick against the second generation and were not going to make one stick against the third. The third. While she is busy looking things up, here is one you can look up in about half a second, whether you are subscribed. Tanya sat in her kitchen in Atlanta at 2 in the morning with her laptop light on her face, and she did not cry, and she did not shout. She did the thing that people actually do, which is nothing at all, for about an hour, while the whole shape of the last 5 months rearranged itself around a new center. Then she called him. It was afternoon in Seoul. She did not accuse him, she just asked him in a completely level voice to tell her what he did. And here is the thing that made everything afterwards so much harder than it should have been. He did not lie. He could have. He was extremely good at it. He had been doing it since he was 19, and she was 6,000 miles away with nothing but a badly translated website. He was quiet for 11 seconds. She counted them. And then he told her the truth, all of it, in the flattest voice she had ever heard him use, and it took 19 minutes, and she did not interrupt him once. He told her about his grandfather and the fishing port, about the 1,100 families, about what moved and where it moved, and who it hurt at the far end of the chain, and he did not soften that part, and he did not once say the words, "But I am not like that," because he knew that he was. When he finished, he said that he had understood from the first week that he should stop calling her, and that he had kept calling her anyway, and that this was the most selfish thing he had ever done, which, given everything else he had just told her, she understood to be a remarkable statement. Then he said he would not call again unless she asked him to, and he hung up. Here is the second question, and I want you to be honest with yourself before you answer it, because it is easy to be certain about this one when it is not your phone. She had 5 months, a dislocated shoulder, and her life. He had a confession and a family business built on other people's ruin. If that call came to you this afternoon, would you have asked him to call again? Tell me in the comments. I want to see how divided this one gets. She did not call for 9 days. On the 10th day she called, and when he picked up she said one sentence. She said, "I want you to stop." And he said, "Yes." He meant it. That is what nobody who has not lived near that world ever quite believes, and it is the tragedy sitting underneath this entire story. He meant it completely.
Over the following 4 months, he did more to unwind that machine than his father had done in 20 years. He closed 2 routes. He shut the port operation in the south entirely and put 90 of those men into the haulage company in Incheon at a personal cost that would have bankrupted a smaller man. He stopped taking meetings he had always taken. And every single time, the machine grew the piece back. A route closes and a competitor takes the corridor and 3 of your people are found in a car park in Daegu, and now you are not choosing whether to be in the business, you are choosing whether to bury your own men. A port shuts, and the money that funded 1,100 households stops, and a man who worked for your father for 30 years sits across from you and asks, without any anger at all, what he is supposed to tell his sons. He explained this to Tanya on a call in January, and she listened to him describe it, and she said the thing that broke him. She said, "Doyen, you are not running it, it is running you." He said nothing for a while. Then he said that his grandfather had said something similar to his father once, and that his father had laughed. By February, they had been talking every day for 8 months and had spent a total of 40 minutes in each other's physical company, all of it in a barley field or an ambulance. She had turned the promise over in her hands until the paint came off it. He was not going to change. Not because he did not want to, because a man cannot resign from a thing that was never a job. It was not what he did, it was the water he had been born in, and everybody he had ever loved was swimming in it. So she did what Tanya Brooks had always done when the ground got too close. She booked the flight. Entry 3, the 9th of March, Seoul, South Korea. She had imagined the arrivals hall 100 times on the flight over. She had imagined him standing at the barrier the way men stand at barriers in films. What she got was a woman in a gray suit holding a card with a name on it that was not Tanya's, who took her bag without asking and walked her out through a service corridor to a car park where 2 black cars were waiting with their engines running, and Do-yoon was in the back of the second one, and he did not get out. He apologized for that before he said hello. He said the terminal had cameras. He said it as though he were apologizing for rain. The next 6 days were the strangest of her life, and the worst part was that most of them were wonderful. He took her to a restaurant in Seonsu with 11 tables, and all 11 tables were empty because he had bought the entire evening so that there would be nobody in the room. The food was the best she had ever eaten. She ate it in a silent dining room while a chef she never met cooked for 2 people and 4 men stood outside in the corridor. He took her to a cinema in Gangnam at 11 at night, and they watched a film in a screen with 240 seats in it and no other human being. She laughed in the empty dark, and it echoed. Halfway through, she reached over and took his hand, and found that he was not watching the film, he was watching the 2 exits. He took her walking along the Han River at dawn, which was the only thing in the whole 6 days that felt like a life instead of a performance, because at that hour he ran anyway, and the men had to jog to keep up, and she thought, for about 20 minutes, that this might be survivable. Then on the 4th day, they went to a market in Gwangjang, because she asked to, because she wanted 1 ordinary hour. 1 hour of noise and elbows and strangers, and he agreed against every instinct he had. They lasted 11 minutes. She was standing at a stall eating something fried out of a paper cup, laughing, and a man came past her shoulder too fast, and she never even saw what happened, she only felt the air change. When she turned around, one of Do-yoon's men had the stranger against a steel shutter by the throat, and the stranger was about 60, and he had dropped a bag of oranges, and they were rolling everywhere across the floor of the market, and 40 people were watching, and nobody, Not one single person in that entire market said a word. That was the moment, not the empty restaurant, not the empty cinema. 40 people watching a man be lifted off the ground over a bag of oranges, and every single one of them deciding to look at the floor. In the car, she asked him what would have happened to that man if she had not been there. He did not answer her, and the not answering was the answer, and they drove back through Seoul in a silence that had a temperature. That night, in the flat on the 39th floor with the whole lit city underneath the window, she told him she could not do this. Not the money, not the men, the oranges. And he told her the rest of it. He had been holding it for 9 months. He had rehearsed it in 3 languages and never found a version that did not end with her on a plane. The airfield outside Bonn was on their books. Not directly, 4 layers back, through a leasing company in Rotterdam and a freight consultancy that existed only as a filing cabinet. But it was theirs, part of a European laundry his father had built in the 90s, one of 11 small aviation businesses that moved money rather than cargo. The maintenance budget was fiction. The rigging contracts were fiction. The man who had packed and inspected Tanya's rental rig that morning had been paid for 11 minutes of work on a rig that needed 40, because the airfield's real purpose had nothing to do with keeping anybody alive, and nobody at any level of that structure had ever once thought about the people who were actually getting into the plane. Her parachute had failed because of his family. He had not known it on the day. He found out 8 days later when he ran the field's ownership out of habit and hit his own reflection 4 layers down. He told her that he had sat in his office in Seoul with that document in front of him for 2 hours, that the correct thing, the clean thing, was to send her the document, tell her everything, and never contact her again. And that, instead, he had put it in a drawer and sent her a message asking how her shoulder was. He said that he did not know even now how much of what he felt for her was love, and how much of it was a man trying to buy something back that his family had broken. He said he had stopped being able to tell the difference sometime around November and had decided he no longer cared, which was, he said, exactly the kind of decision his father used to make. Tanya stood at the window of a flat on the 39th floor of a building in a city where she knew nobody and understood nothing that was written on any sign, and she thought about a barley field. And she said the thing she had worked out on the flight over before she knew any of this, and which was somehow still true. She said that his family had put a knot in her parachute, and he had gone head down at 300 kilometers an hour to fix it. She said she was not going to spend her life being grateful to a man for saving her from his own house. She said the only question left was whether he wanted to keep living in the house. He said no. She said, then we are not talking about changing you, we are talking about leaving. Entry 4, the 11th of March, Seoul, South Korea. His mother came to the flat the following morning. Madame Han was 66, small, immaculate, with gray hair cut at the jaw, and she had buried a husband and 2 brothers-in-law and had never once in her life raised her voice. She sat in the living room and drank the tea Tanya made her and complimented it, and then she explained the situation with the same patience she had used on her son when he was 24. She said that she had no objection to Tanya personally, She said her son looked better than he had in 9 years, and that she was not a monster and could see what that meant. Then she said that there were 1,100 households and that there were 4 men in Busan who had been waiting since the Ojijin funeral for the 3rd generation to show them a soft place, and a wife from outside was a soft place with a face and a name and a passport. She said, and she said it gently, that people in their family did not leave. She said her own sister had tried in 1987. She did not finish that sentence. She put her cup down and said that she would like grandchildren one day, and she stood up and she went. Tanya sat on the floor of that living room for a long time after the door closed, and what she felt, to her own surprise, was not fear. It was the old feeling, the one from the edge of the door at 13,000 feet. That woman got everything she wanted in under 4 minutes without once raising her voice. So I will ask nicely too. If you are not subscribed yet, please do, so we can keep bringing you stories like this one. Because she had been doing this her whole life. She had been standing at open doors in aeroplanes since she was 22. And she knew something that Han Do-yoon, who had been managing a machine since he was 19, had never once been allowed to learn. You cannot climb down out of a fall. There is no gentle way out of a thing like this. You do not reform it. You do not negotiate with it. You do not resign from it politely over 18 months. You go head down, and you take the whole altitude at once. They built it in 51 days, and they built it the way you pack a rig, which is slowly, in order, checking every stage twice, because the whole thing is only ever going to work once. The money came first, and this is the part people always get wrong, because he did not steal it. There was no vault, no bags, no drive through the night with a boot full of cash. There was a Maltese subsidiary of the shipping arm, entirely clean, holding 4 vessels and a warehouse in the Grand Harbor, that his father had set up in 1998 and that had made honest money every year since. Do-yoon sold it, over 6 weeks, to a Greek family who had wanted it for a decade, at a fair price, through lawyers, in daylight. It was legally his. Every won of it was legally his, and that was precisely why nobody could ever come and ask for it back. The second piece was the insurance, and that was Tanya's idea, because a physiotherapist who has spent 9 years being lied to by insurance companies understands leverage in a way a crown prince does not. He assembled a ledger, 41 years of it, names, routes, dates, the 4 men in Busan included, and he deposited a sealed copy with a firm in Zurich under an instruction so simple it needed only 1 page. If either Han Do-yoon or Tanya Brooks died, disappeared, or failed to send a single word by email on the first day of every month, the firm would forward the entire ledger to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, to Interpol, and to 4 newspapers. He did not hide from his family. That was the third piece, and it was the one that took the courage. He told them. He called a meeting at the house and Seongbuk with all of it on the table, the sale, the ledger, the Zurich instruction, and he named his successor in the same breath. Baek Min-sok, who had been at his side since they were 19, who had a wife and a daughter and an appetite Do-yoon had never had, and had watched grow for years. Min-sok did not pretend to be sad. He asked one question, which was whether the ledger named him, and Do-yoon said that it did, and Min-sok laughed once and said that was the first honest thing anyone in that room had said in a decade. His mother spoke nothing at all during the meeting. She spoke to him alone afterwards in the courtyard for 4 minutes. Nobody knows what was said. He has never told Tanya, and Tanya has never asked. And there is a photograph of that house on a shelf in Malta that neither of them has ever taken down. They left on the 8th of May, on separate flights, on new documents, through 3 countries. He went last. He was in the departure hall at Incheon for 50 minutes, and he told her afterwards that he spent all 50 of them expecting a hand on his shoulder, and that when the plane finally left the ground, his whole body started shaking exactly the way it had in the barley field. Entry 5. The 19th of May. Valletta, Malta. They came into the Grand Harbor on a ferry at 7 in the morning, in the light that comes off that limestone at that hour, and makes the whole city look like it has been lit from inside. She had picked Malta for one reason, and she told him about it on the deck of that ferry. It is not the Amalfi Coast. It is 180 miles south of it, and the light is the same, and it was in her mother's shoebox on the 3rd brochure down, and her mother had circled it in biro. They married 11 weeks later in a small church in Burgu, with 9 people present, 6 of whom they had met since arriving. She wore ivory. He shook so badly during the vows that the celebrant stopped and waited for him. Nia flew over and cried through the entire ceremony and told him afterwards, with her mascara ruined, that she had spent a year hating him and had about 90 more seconds of it left in her. He is a diving instructor now. That is the whole of it. He runs a small outfit out of a shop front near the water with 3 sets of gear and a boat he is always repairing, and he teaches tourists and school children how to go safely into a place the human body was never built for, and he is patient with them beyond all reason, and he checks every single piece of equipment twice before it goes on a person, and he has never once told any of them why. She opened a physiotherapy practice above a bakery on a street too narrow for cars. Her Maltese is bad, and her patients enjoy that enormously. Their daughter Ayana was born in the 2nd year, and their son Noah in the 4th. Ayana is loud and takes up room, and has already been told twice about jumping off the harbor wall. Noah is quiet and runs and gets up before anybody else in the house to do it. On the first day of every month, one of them sends a single email to a law firm in Zurich. It contains one word. They do it before breakfast. It takes 9 seconds. The children think it is a joke between their parents, and one day it will not be a joke anymore, and they will have to be told everything, and both of them know that. And she still jumps, twice a year, from a small airfield on Gozo, and he goes with her every time, and he inspects her rig himself, every buckle, every line, every fold, and it takes him 40 minutes, and she lets him because she understands exactly what those 40 minutes are for. Here is what this story has taught me about people, and I have thought about it a great deal. We think that character is what a person chooses over a lifetime. It is not. A lifetime is mostly momentum, and most of us are simply traveling in the direction we were pointed by people who died before we were old enough to argue with them. Character is what a person does in the 9 seconds when there is no time to consult anybody, no one is watching, and nothing at all is in it for them. Everything after those 9 seconds is just a man trying to become the person he already was for a moment. So tell me where you land, because I know this one splits a room. And while you are deciding, he checks every buckle twice before she jumps, so I am going to check one more time whether you have subscribed. Same energy, much lower stakes. Team Tanya, who says that a man who was born into it can still be worth the risk, and that you judge a person by the 9 seconds and not by the surname. Or Team Nia, who says that she got on that plane to Seoul with her eyes open, that oranges on a market floor is who he actually was, and that this ended well by luck and not by judgment. Say it in the comments. Team Tanya or Team Nia? Do not sit on the fence. I can see you. And one last thing, because I could not leave it out. 3 summers ago, an envelope arrived at the house in Birgu. No stamp, no postmark. Nobody had posted it. Somebody had walked up that narrow street and put it through the door by hand. Inside was a photograph of the 4 of them on the Valletta ferry, taken from perhaps 30 meters away, on a morning 11 days earlier. On the back, in his mother's handwriting in Korean, was one word: grandchildren. He burned it in the kitchen sink and they did not run, and they are still there, and that is a story for another entry. If you made it this far, tell me one thing you are taking away from this story, or one piece of advice you would have given Tanya on the night before that flight to Seoul. Subscribe and turn the bell on so we can bring you more stories like this.